Welcome to Beyond Einstein. My guest today is the reason why I'm doing podcasts today. It's Cynthia Husted, who is a brilliant PhD physicist who's had a very interesting life path. Our paths crossed, well, Cynthia, 13 years ago, 14 years ago,
15, 2011. Yeah.
2011, where a friend introduced us, and we're both sort of heading in the same direction from very different perspectives to try to understand purpose of life, potential for life after death, metaphysics, and so forth. And Cynthia's life experiences combined with my very untraditional path into physics turned out to be a gift to me. We spent 5 years together looking at the theory that I'd been given, and Cynthia was phenomenally gifted at research, and we got access to the Stanford Online Library through the Hoover Institute. Together, we worked for 5 years and looked at all of the scientific observations and dug into why the theories that we have today were they came up with those theories and realized that there wasn't an awful lot of substance behind a lot of the very complex theories, and that the theories that we were working on were consistent with all observational facts. But anyway, I'd like to start this off with Cynthia. You were a physicist, a professional physicist, and you had a life changing experience. Can you share that with us?
Sure. Actually, my doctorate's in physical chemistry, but all my doctoral classwork was in physics, quantum mechanics, thermodynamics. I focused on nuclear magnetism, principles of nuclear magnetism. So I was working at this small scale.
Mhm.
Um, and I was really interested in this my whole life in energy, this concept of energy. And Eastern medicine, and, the first in my family to go to college, so I didn't really know my options, so I first became a nurse, an ICU nurse, which I'm really grateful for all those experiences, and it's my first experience with hands-on energy, but being with others as they died, and that ended up really playing a big role in my life because decades later, I had a near-death experience.
How'd that come about?
Well, I got my PhD thinking I was gonna use it in a non-conventional way to study energy and this link with Eastern medicines, because they all have this concept of this unlimited energy of the universe that flows through our body, powers our body, that we can access for healing. And then I went to UC Santa Barbara and developed my own lab, and they don't have a medical school there. So, I was researching, neurological disorders, with approaches in physics for my whole career. And I like technology, so I did a lot of technical development for my PhD postdoc in Santa Barbara, where I'd modify existing techniques to study brain tissue. So then when I got to Santa Barbara, because there's no med school, they would form these research centers to have a focus on a medical issue, and they asked me if I'd direct a center for the study of neurodegenerative disorders, and I said, "Sure." It was like a dream job. I mean, in the center and in my lab, we were taking approaches in biophysics, bioengineering, cell biology. We were learning to culture brain tissue to study in the lab. Um, and then the next thing I knew, I was asked to manage a 3-acre medicinal plant project off campus. And I love gardening. So I'm like, sure. I had a lot of employees at the garden and in my lab and students and volunteers, but I love gardening. So I went out to the garden one Saturday and was watering some plants. And I looked on my hand and a black widow spider had walked onto my hand from under my coat sleeve. And I wasn't a very good biologist. I flicked it off my hand because I didn't think I'd been bitten, but I later learned they anesthetize when they bite, and I'd received a near lethal dose. But it bit me over my elbow, which I think partly saved my life because it slowly diffused into my body. But a few months later, I ended up in the hospital, and by then my stomach was paralyzed. I couldn't keep water down. I'd shrunk to about 85 pounds. I was in like a spastic paralysis like this. It took like 2 hands just to hold a paperback book. And I was having primitive brainstem symptoms. They thought maybe tetanus had ridden in on the fangs of the spider. I was in the hospital. I just crashed during the 10-day experience, but I had this, I guess, a near-death experience where I left my body. I hovered over my body and looked down at my body, but I saw myself as an energetic being, a light being, not a physical body. And it was a sequence of events. First, I saw my whole body in kind of this soft yellow color. And then I saw blue up here. And then I saw green over my heart. And then suddenly I was back down in my body and I heard this loud cranking noise. And it felt like my chest was cranked open. And then just like that, this wave came in and I felt all the suffering in the world. I mean, it was intense. I gasped. All the suffering I caused others, that other caused me, but the suffering of all sentient beings, humans, plants, animals, earth. And I forgave myself and I forgave others. But then I heard this loud roaring sounds and it had that kind of feeling of going down a tunnel. And I ended up in this very black, dark space where my experience was that time was not linear, space was not limiting, and consciousness existed without physical form. But it was this pure love, like unconditional love, like nothing I had ever experienced. I'm like, wow, where am I? Wait a minute. And then as I took assessment, this voice said to me, oh, no, you don't. And I was kicked out. And I was back in the hospital bed. I wanted to stay. I realized I was still out in the ethers, you know? I was just I wanted to be where I went. So I had to learn how to ground myself and get back into my body. And then that January, you and I met. So the first 3 years that we worked together, I was going through this healing, and
Yeah.
you saw some of it. You saw times when I
No, no,
sh
I remember very well. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it was really something when we were connected because in our very first meeting, one of the first things you asked me is what powers the atom? I'm like, oh my gosh, I've had that same question since 1984
Yeah.
when I started graduate school and took my first quantum mechanics class. And when I asked my professor, he said, just learn the math and you'll understand. Well, I learned the math. I got an A in the class. But I still didn't understand. It eventually kept building on itself, so when I got to Santa Barbara, things made a lot more sense. But I still have that same question, so that's when I met you, I just got pulled into the dialogue.
I remember our introduction. Yeah, I'd had my epiphany, the final epiphany in 2008, which was the byproduct of it was a potential unified theory of physics. But the motivation was the same, I think, as your motivation, which is what is the purpose of life? Why are we here? And it was kicked off by my mother's death
Mhm.
and the need to try to integrate metaphysics with the physical behavior of the universe. And I said, well, look, this is what I believe is happens when we die, which is I was very comfortable with it because it all made sense to me. We got access to the Stanford Library. I mean, you looked at all, you did things I could never ever dream of doing. I'm not intellectually capable of it, but you dug out things that are so obscure. And this is before ChatGPT and a lot of the
Yeah,
things you can do online today. You were
yeah.
doing the grunt research. It is a scientific possibility that you can correct where we are today, 100 years of compounded errors, by simply adding back an energy level, as we call ether energy, and uh, and it all seemed to work.
Well, and I was really amazed how you would grasp onto all these concepts without a background in
Yeah.
science. But also, I think we were a good team because I was focused more on like the atom and the nucleus and nanoscale and small. And I just couldn't believe how you had such a grasp for the scale of the large. And I learned that from you. And because this theory is kind of scaling the large to the small. Um,
And small to large.
Small to large. And, what was fun for me, like those 5 years, I mean, I dove in and I felt like I was doing the depth of getting another PhD, which took me 5 years, um, but I didn't have to memorize for a test. and I could go back and dig out all the original papers and read them and critically evaluate them and find gaps, and those gaps kinda matched up with what you were sharing with me. So but another thing that pulled me in on that first meeting, Cree, was you sharing with me how all this information came to you, like, through dreams and epiphanies, and how do we explain that? And where does it come from, you
Yeah,
know?
it has a source. Certain people are more connected to it than others, I believe,
Yeah,
but it's universal, and, uh, and that connection it needs to be explained, and if you go within the existing status quo consensus physics, there is no on-ramp for that discussion. That
yeah,
puts you out in a whole different level, and I think that one of the most important things in the work that we did is we provided a physical model for the universe that allowed an on-ramp for both consciousness and the potential for life after this, which is, I think, in from both of our perspectives, is by far the most important thing, is trying to understand what's happening to us and why we're here and where we're going. I think
yeah,
that was my primary motivation. I think at the when you had your experience became your primary motion, and you saw things that you could never imagine,
no,
experienced
no,
things that you could not rationalize with your education.
yeah,
And, so I think our work together provided a platform to try to integrate those things in with our everyday lives. We both believe there's a lot more than what we can feel and experience here today. There's much more out there. My experience was kicked off by my mother's death and the need to rationalize that and where'd she go? You want people to you wanna hope there's continuation, but I think both you and I believe that there is. And then from there, you wanna try to understand, well, how does that connect with what we're doing here today? And that's when the epiphanies for me started, and I did not intend to do this. I do not have a physics background. I did not have any serious interest in studying physics, but I would have these epiphanies like you've had, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night with a bolt of energy and this entirely completed thought with information that I never should have had. I knew more about physics, I think, when I came to you than I should have known because I didn't ever
mhm,
study it. Um, but those epiphanies weren't dreams for me. They were like downloads of lots of data. There were no conversations for me. It was like, boom, there it is. And then in 2008, the entire thing came came through. But the I think that what we believe, I think you and I believe, is the missing link between where physics went to during the 20th century and where we need to be is the exclusion of this energy that permeates all space, the ether energy, that everything in the universe feeds off of that energy. And it's that non-physical energy that we convert into organized energy for consciousness. And it's the consciousness then that has the opportunity to continue living without the body and without all of the evolutionary baggage that we carry here today. There is another level where life can exist without an organic structure and time is not linear. And with the nonlinear time comes the elimination of spatial constraints. There's so much more to learn and to adapt to and to grow into. And I think a lot of the people like you that have near death experiences.
I yes, I have, and as I said, I'm really drawn into the Tibetan culture, and I mean, like I said, I don't know
Yeah,
why. I mean, I
I,
taught in China and when and then I went to Tibet, and it felt like I was returning home. It felt familiar.
it makes a hell of a lot more sense than Western medicine.
Oh, it
They look at
does.
the entire structure. They don't look at solving putting band-aids on things. It makes a
And
lot more sense.
well, in Tibet, they have a real elaborate description of the mind and consciousness. Interestingly, Cree, your first information you got for ether was called clear energy.
Yeah.
And in the Tibetan culture, that subtle consciousness is called clear light, the clear energy and clear light. Or, you know?
Same thing from different angles. The challenge that you had in physics, which is the same thing I had in looking at physics, was the dependence of on fundamental forces in our model with both quantum and relativity. And the key question, I think, and the ones that you and I both started with, is that the atom needs to have an energy source. It's doing a lot of work. It's creating an electromagnetic field. You've got a bonding structure for the nuclei. You've got this incredibly powerful plasma field around the nuclei, the electron field. There has to be an energy source.
Yeah,
And that's where
it's
you and I
constantly
think
moving.
it's constantly there's no, and we know through terrestrial physics that nothing moves without some type of an energy exchange or a transfer of energy from one object to another. So I think that the whole idea of this, just adding back in this foundational energy source, and then all we did from there is scale it. Say, well,
Yeah,
if the atom is drawing in this energy to power itself, then the Earth must be drawing in a boatload of it from this region of the solar system.
yeah,
And then we did all the math looking at the inverse squared law in reverse and the energy concentration per unit volume that converts into what we observe as gravity.
yeah,
And then we kept going outward, and the thing worked just by
yeah.
allowing flows of this life energy to be added back to the model. So I think that's kind of where we ended up.
Yeah, and we were both in agreement, I mean, modern science is great, and we believe the data, and it's just maybe interpreted incorrectly, and we
Right.
need to have a new interpretation of the data.
Yeah.
I have to admit, it took me a little while to kind of feel comfortable with that. I was wanting to get back into research, and I felt like I was committing academic suicide. But the more we dove in, the more I was just totally okay with that. I have my own nonprofit now, my own way of doing research where I can be
Do you know why?
open-minded, but not
Yeah.
reductionist also. Look
Yeah.
at how everything's connected.
The physics education more as an indoctrination. There's not a lot of latitude for creative thought. There's not a lot of tolerance for questioning fundamentals. It's, you do the math, you memorize it, and we move on.
We have written this in many different formats. And we played around with the math to show clear energy comes into the sun, and how it comes into the atom, and how those two scale and match up. We've scaled it to other planets. In 2017, you worked on your film, Chasing Einstein. I was invited to give a few talks. One was at Harvard on the intersection of physics, neuroscience, and Tibetan medicine, and that was very well received. So we had some writing done, but it hadn't gotten out there yet. And then 2 years ago, I had another near death experience. And this one was more immediate. Unbeknownst to me, I was born with a congenital kidney defect. And these days, they find it in utero on ultrasound. It's an obstruction, tore, so my kidney was spilling into my abdomen. I
Wow.
went into yeah, it was gnarly. I went into septic shock. I had emergency surgery. And as we were driving to the hospital, this voice in my head said, "You're going to die." I'm like, well, that's a strange message to receive from back pain. And did this scan and found this had torn and my kidney was leaking. And then I went into septic shock and ICU. And the surgeon came to get me and he said, "We have to take you now or you're going to die, but there's still no guarantee." And I'm like, I'd been studying the Vajra yoga and how to access the subtle mind and the universal energy. And I know that kept me alive because this was more immediate. I could tell I was leaving my body. And so I was calling in all the unlimited healing energy of the universe into my body. But then my heart was open, like with my first near death experience. And I was just sending out love and compassion and gratitude to all my caregivers. And it was just this energy coming in and going out. And it's just this cycle of energy going through me. Well, the next morning after the surgery, the surgeon came in because he didn't know if I'd make it through the night because of the septic shock, and he could not believe how much I'd improved. But then after that, I came back like, I got to finish this work with Cree, and how does this clear light that I've been learning about match up with clear energy or ether? I've written a pretty thorough history. ether,
I
and
like that.
I think people would like even just to read that as a standalone to understand how we got here, where we're neglecting the ether. One of the scientific books, well, it's Frank Wilczek. He got a Nobel Prize for work in the strong force, but he's written this book called The Lightness of Being, Mass, Ether, and the Unification of Forces. So I've been kind of reading into who's tapping into this and how to address them or their knowledge or their frame of reference. And this is kind of what I learned through the medical work too, how to have a reciprocal dialogue. And so that's my approach.
What's interesting, and Wilczek is a good example of it, is everybody who's won a Nobel Prize, or most of the people who've won Nobel Prizes, they have a carte blanche to come out and disagree with people without getting excommunicated from the physics community.
Hmm.
They've now got a pass.
Yeah,
And those are the guys, and there's so many of them that are talking about ether. They're calling us all ethereal beings. There's a bunch of PhD physicists. If you're not outside, if you've not been anointed a physics god by getting a PhD, your career's at a risk if you rock the boat. So it's
yeah,
really kind of funny that, some of these guys that are, you know, have already climbed the mountain are now going back saying, "Hey, you know, we're going the wrong direction. We need to make a course correction here." And I hope that what we can do together is provide a foundation for that course correction and provide a path forward. But the corrected model, physics model, probably the most important thing that it has is a on ramp for clear light, for the communication with the next level, which is what happened to me in my epiphanies, which is what you experienced in your near death experiences. And I
yeah.
think that people are more interested in that than the Higgs boson gives mass to particles, which is a bunch of garbage anyway. But that is where I think we can really get people involved. Is it right or wrong? Who knows? We'll find out someday, hopefully. But at least we have a platform that we can share both on the spirituality side and on the physical behavior of the universe side.
I agree. And I've in the last, well, I wouldn't say few years, but decades or more, I mean, I've connected with groups of scientists who have similar overlap in the consciousness and matter, or consciousness and the nature, the physical nature of reality, and how do we link those two?
And I've read a lot about this. There are traditional and non-traditional ways of learning, of experimenting. The traditional is, Galileo telescope technology makes an observation that changes the world. Einstein is non-traditional, thought experiment that found roots and grew and grew and grew and became what we have today. Your experience and my experience are non-traditional.
Yeah,
And because there's no way of addressing that within the existing models, it sort of immediately defaults into kind of crazy. And I think it's important to bring the kind of crazy, which have statistically important examples, into the mainstream. And if we can accomplish that, I think that would do more to advance the human condition than, you know, finding the next particle or theorizing what a black hole does. We know what the black hole does. We've already studied that. And Hawking was wrong for good reasons, because the gravitational theory was wrong. So
well, and that kind of points to our document that, I mean, I've got to add more to this, but we went through everything that needs to be reinterpreted. And at first it was like, oh my gosh, this is
it's
a
a
lot.
lot.
It's a
Yeah.
lot.
What's interesting is that if you pose the question to people, non-scientists, but very smart people who've studied science in school, and you say, "What would you expect the world to look like, the theoretical physics world to look like if Einstein made an omission, critical omission, 100 years ago, and that every observation over the last 100 years had to be reconciled to a flawed foundational model, which is we have divergent theories for the big and for the small. We have a mess of illogical offshoot theories both on the relativity side and the quantum side, and it's a mess. Nobody understands it. Nobody can explain it.
Mhm.
And it's gonna be incredibly disruptive because so much of what we have today has been corrupted by flawed core theory.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be a difficult process.
Another, term that we used in our dialogue was interdimensional physics,
Yeah.
and how this ether, let's say, like from the Oort cloud is being drawn to the sun and sucked into the sun to power the sun, or then it's off shooting into the planets, into the atoms, what have you. Once it gets to a critical density, it goes from a massless state to having mass. Well, first plasma and in and out, and then mass, creating matter. But I would like to keep it accessible to everyone.
And allow people to respond to it. Uh, most of the responses I get are, "You think you're smarter than Einstein?" "No, I don't think I'm smarter than Einstein." It gets personal really fast, which is, I guess, is what the internet does. It provides
Yeah,
cover for.
and the pros and cons of it, but, there are a lot of books out there. Einstein's
Yeah,
greatest mistake, the emission of
yeah,
heat, Einstein and the ether. I mean, a
yeah,
lot of people have brought this up.
yeah.
It's
Well,
just
we need to bring it to the forefront now because it's if we continue on the path at the physics level, at the physical physics level, I don't
Mhm.
think we'll make any progress whatsoever. I mean,
Yeah,
you can smash as many neutrons together as you want, and you're not gonna get anything else out of it besides a bunch of debris that dissolves back into a clear state, taking stable nuclear energy and having it dissolve back into massless energy. Well, Cynthia, I hope this is the first of many conversations we can have over
thank
the
you,
next couple of
Cree, and
years.
we've had many. I mean, I have to say, I've saved we've sent probably thousands of emails back and forth.
Yeah,
This was all unearthed, and it was quite a dialogue, both in person and by email, and so let us revive that and get this out there.
wonderful. Look forward to it.
We want to hear from you. Join the conversation.